Welcome everyone to today's webinar. We generally do about 3 webinars a month. The first Wednesday of the month is generally an overview of ClubExpress, and that's done by our sales team. And that's mostly for people that are either new to ClubExpress or considering ClubExpress as a possible association management solution. And usually the second and fourth Wednesdays of the month, we do webinars that are sort of drill downs onto particular modules or particular updates. And today is one of those. And so what we generally do is a little introduction like this, and then we'll do a demonstration, and then we'll have questions and answers. But let's take care of a little housekeeping first. The phones and the microphones are muted. So if you have questions, enter them into the chat window. And at the end, we will revisit the questions, see if anything hasn't been answered. And this is mostly for the benefit of the people that are watching it on a recording. Now, speaking of recordings, the recording of this webinar and all of our webinars and tutorials are available on the ClubExpress Cool Stuffs page. And so if you go to clubexpress.com and click on Cool Stuff at the top of the page, you'll see on the left side there's a tab for webinars. And if you click on that, you'll see the upcoming webinar schedule, as well as a list of recently recorded webinars. And right above the webinars tab is the video tutorials tab, so you can also see a list of the recently published video tutorials. Video tutorials are also available in the help screens and on your control panel in the support tab. All of our videos are actually hosted on YouTube. And if you go to any of our tutorials, you can click on the clubexpress.com link, and you can click on the subscribe button. And if you subscribe and click on notify, you'll be notified of all new content that we provide, all of the new videos, whether they be tutorials or webinars or overviews or whatever. So that's a really handy thing to do. And one last thing, if you're using ClubExpress, and particularly if ClubExpress is working very well for you, we would like for you to go to clubexpress.com/reviews and click on one of these review sites and leave a review so that other people that are evaluating association management systems can have the benefit of your experience using ClubExpress. Today we're talking about the Collectibles module. And this is a module that actually a lot of clubs and organizations are using, whether they be car clubs or boating clubs or bicycle clubs. It's universally applicable, and it's part of the basic ClubExpress feature set. The Collectibles module allows clubs and associations the ability to track items, such as cars, that are owned by their members and optionally by non-members. So when you enable the Collectibles module, if you configure it as such, you can put a link on the member's profile page so that they can click on it and they can add and update their personal items. What a lot of people don't realize is that an item may be in the database several times because an item might have transferred ownership. So it appears under one owner and then the new owner. Or you might want to have 2 different versions of the same item where you had, well, this is the car that I bought and it was in this condition and it had all these properties and things like that. And then make a copy of that and update it because of all the improvements that you made to the car. Maybe when you bought it, it was yellow and now it's red. So it's got a different set of properties now. And because we can tie these things together using a reference ID, when somebody searches for that reference ID, it will bring up all of the instances of that item. And there are some clubs that use this as a registry, where they're just trying to register all of the known items, like all of the known owners of a particular vintage car. Very often they want to say, oh, we know about this car. We don't know who owns it, but we want to put it in here because we want to have a registry of all of the items that could potentially be owned by our club members and maybe somebody else. So in today's session, we're going to cover a lot of ground. We're going to take a look at the user's view of items, and this can be configured so that only members can see it or that everyone can see it. So we'll take a look at that. We'll look at some of the search options and view the results and the details. And then we'll look at how you can specify searching by additional questions. Then there's a a view that very few people realize, and that is the link on the member's bio page, so that people can get to a member's collectibles via their bio page. And then we'll look at how a member manages his or her own items. And we'll look at the status icons, reference identifiers, maintenance icons. Then we'll add a new item and look at the basic information and photos and look at additional questions. And then we'll wrap it up by looking at the administrator view of items and look at their search options. We'll view results. We'll edit an item, maybe change its status to decline an item. There are some additional features in the copy functionality, so you can actually move an item from one person to another person. We'll look at the options and how to set up properties, look at reports, and we'll actually add a balloon for a member or a non-member or someone who's unknown. So we actually have a lot of ground to cover. So let me share my screen. We are now looking at one of our demo clubs. This is the Balloon Club. And this isn't a real club, but we use this for a lot of our demos and tutorials. And what I've done is, as an administrator, I have put collectibles on the main menu, on the public side of the menu. But if you look at the top here, you'll notice that we are not logged in. So if I click on collectibles, it's going to say, hey, this thing is configured right now only to be available to members. So you'd have to log in. So what I've done here is I've loaded another browser, another version of a browser, and here I'm logged in as the administrator. So if I go to the control panel and I go to the People tab and I look at the collectibles, it says that it's active and it's available for members only. If I want to make it available to the public, I would click on the Configure button here and change its visibility from members only to any website visitor. When I do that, and then I come back to where we are not logged in and I refresh the page, now if I click on collectibles, it won't ask me for that login because I said that it's available to anyone. And there's a bunch of search fields here, and we'll get into that in a moment. But if I just click on search, you will see that there are 11 items found, and they're called, in this case, they're called balloons. And you can configure the word that you want your items to be called. And you'll see that we have an item name and a member name and details, but you'll notice here that there's no link on the member name. And this is because we are not currently logged in. So we really don't have access to member information. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to log in as Manny Diaz. And now you'll see that we have links underneath. So if I click on Martin Smith's name, it's going to pop up Martin's information. So that's a fundamental difference because the public is not allowed to see certain information about members. So looking at this screen, this would typically be gotten to from something put on the members menu. So in this case, instead of putting it across the top, this would be over here under collectibles, and that would bring us to this page. And if you note what's called the breadcrumbs here, this is from the home page directly to the collectibles page, which will be different. You'll see that when we're looking at the collectibles for a particular member, you're going to see a little different profile here. So this is just the collectibles page. So if I search for everything, a couple of things happen. One is that the search panel gets collapsed to make more room for the results. If I want to search for a particular thing, for say Smith, and I search, we will see just the items for Martin Smith. And if I want to reset, I can reset. Or if I know the name of the balloon, I could put in the name of the balloon, the owner's city. And here's this thing called an NAA registration number, which I believe is the National Aeronautic Association. And you'll see how this was configured and why this was configured. But you can also limit by chapter and such if your organization uses chapters. Now, looking down here, if we look at, say, let's look at this one here. If I click on details, you'll see that there's a section up here that's general balloon details: who owns it, the balloon's name, its registration number, when it was purchased. And on the right-hand side, there's an item that says click to view photo album, because it turns out that this member has a photo album for this item. And then there's a bunch of fields for balloon properties. Now, there are actually more fields than this, but it turns out that it only shows you the values for questions or properties that have answers in them. So if you have something about the balloon envelope circumference, well, they didn't answer it, so it won't show up in here. So you only see information that's actually answered rather than a bunch of blank information. And some of these things, like this latest Northwest Balloon Club inspection date, is something that only the administrators are allowed to edit. So some properties may not be editable by the members. And this is set up into 2 pages of properties. The first page is just general balloon properties. And the second page was set up for what's called envelope preferences. What kind of balloon the envelope is the bag that holds the hot air. And there is a scale from 1 to 5 as to how important are things. So this one says that the shape is 4 out of 5 and color pattern was 5 out of 5 and all of that. So let's go back to the previous page. And let's look at the additional questions. So if I click on here to toggle the additional questions, now we get things about envelope materials. So here we could search for any of the particular materials. If it's a pick list or check boxes or radio buttons, you'll have a list here. If it's a numeric value, you'll get equals, not equal to, things like that. Colors, if we want to look for just red balloons, we can click red. And so you get all of these fields, and they all get combined. They get added to each other. So if you said, I want red balloons that are in Chicago, it would not include any red balloons or those in Chicago. It would be only those that are red and in Chicago. So if we look for red balloons and I click search, you will get this short list here. And if we look at any one of these, say Marty Rainbow, you'll see that the primary color is red. As long as we're logged in as Manny, before we go in and look at his collectibles, let's go to the membership directory. Because what we can do is we can search for another member. And if I search for, say, Martin Smith, and if I click on him, this brings us to his bio page, which has got all this information about Martin Smith. At the bottom of the page is the Collectibles link. So if you click on that, now if we look at the breadcrumbs here, it says Home Member Bio Collectibles. And these are collectibles, but only for Martin Smith. So you see that this is another way of looking at only Martin Smith's balloons. So that's just something that most people don't even know that it's there. So how does a member manage his or her own collectibles? Well, it depends on how you as an administrator have set this up, because there's an option that asks whether or not members are allowed to manage their own collectibles. And we'll get to that later on. But this one has been set up so that a member can manage their own collectibles. So if we click on Profile and go to the Collectibles module here, this shows all of the collectibles for the currently logged in member. And again, it says Home Member Profile Collectibles, but unlike the ones from Martin Smith, because where Manny, who was looking at Martin Smith before, now Manny is looking at his own collectibles. So we have a couple of options here. We can search for any status, and I'll talk about status in a moment. And you'll see that the grid here shows a card for each of the items. And each one of these items has the name of the item, the ID, when it was acquired, but you'll see that it also has an icon for its status. So its status could be a couple of different things, and they're listed up here. There's active, draft, archived, and rejected. So draft down here is an item that's in process, and the member is still developing this and filling out the information, but they're not ready to publish it yet. Active means that it's completed and it will be shown to everybody else on the main collectibles page. So anything with the green check mark here will actually show up on the page. Rejected, which is the red dot with the X in it, says that it has been rejected by an administrator, and that administrator has determined that the item is not suitable or it needs some corrections. For example, a member, this one here, the reason it was rejected was that that ID is not actually in the proper format. It needs to start with an N and things like that. So it's the wrong ID number. So this club won't let you publish it unless you've got a valid ID number. But it could be any number of reasons. And the member can then edit it. Come in here, click on the edit icon, fix it, and then contact the administrator. I'm going to cancel this. Contact the administrator to get it reinstated, to make it active. But a member cannot change the status from rejected to active or anything else. And archived, this one here, is an item that you just don't want to show on the collectibles module. You don't want it to show on the collectibles screen, but you want to keep it there. And it might be something that you've sold or you've otherwise removed it from your collection. So the way you archive it is to go into anything. Let's take a look at this one here. And you would take its status and change it to archived. So that keeps it in the database, but it's not going to show. It's going to have this archive status. And that's different than clicking on the delete icon, which simply removes it from the database entirely as if it never existed. So as a member here, the member can do a couple of things. One is they can change the display sequence so that when people look at the collectibles for this member on their bio page, like we had seen from Martin Smith, we can say, oh, we want to have black diamonds up at the top, so we can just move it here and choose save, and now black diamond gets moved up to the front position. So this would be the way it would display. But one of the things that most people are going to do is add an item. Now, again, this system has been configured so that the items are called balloons. Well, that's because the only thing that this club collects are balloons. But what if a club collected multiple kinds of things? So what you would probably do is change the word so that it uses just the word item. So it would say add item. And then you could actually add a property, like in one of the additional questions, that says, what kind of item is this? Is this a balloon? Is this a basket? You know, it could be any number of things. So your club or association might collect various kinds of things, but there's really only one collectible type. So one of the first questions is, okay, what subtype is this? So let's add a balloon. There's a couple of things to consider. One here is we're going to ask for balloon name, an ID number, and when it's acquired. But as far as photos go, it can either have no photos, a single photo. When you click on single photo, it's going to ask you to upload a photo. And it will set up a dialog box here that asks you to select the file. But what if I want to use a photo album? If I select the photo album, it's going to ask for which one of your existing albums do you want to use. So in this case, let's prepare a photo album first. yes, I could open up another tab and do this, but let's just go back to the profile page for a moment. Click on Profile, click on Photo Albums, and let's add a photo album. We're going to make a thing called the Checkers Balloon. Now that I've got this album called Checkers Balloon, I'm going to edit the album. I'm going to add multiple photos. It asks me to select the photos, and I'll just grab these 4 photos here. It'll take a moment to upload all of them. And if I save it, it will actually upload them and add them to the album, at which point I can then go in and just change the display order here. But in turns out this is the display order I want, because I want this to be the first picture in the album. So now if I go back to Profile and go to Collectibles and add a balloon, we're going to call this balloon Checkers. And let's do its registration number. Make up a registration number. And so anything with a red dot is required. When was it purchased? So if I say 12/1/2019, or you can just put in a year purchased or whatever, or the date that it was sold, because you may have purchased it and now you've sold it. You can put in those, but these are optional. And its status is I want it to become active. And let's use the photo album. And now when I select, now that I've created this new album for this member, we can pick up the Checkers Balloon. So that's the basic information. Now let's take a look at the questions. So I'm just going to answer these fairly quickly to say, oh, the envelope material is nylon and polyester, and it's got a Nomex skirt, and it's a single open basket, and it's got a single burner. I don't know what the circumference is. And let's say that it's primarily blue. And Wile E. Coyote is familiar with the Acme Balloon Company. And this is a model Genesis. And model year is, let's say, maybe 2015. And what do I use it for? I use it for leisure and promotion advertising and other. What other? Let's say club events. And that's because when this thing was configured, there's a field for checkboxes that specifies that you want them to be able to add other. So you don't need to add the word other in there. By checking it, it will surface this field if other is selected. And you'll see that these are grayed out. There's latest Northwest Balloon Club inspection and what the inspector comments are. And if I tried to save it without these required fields being checked, it would not let me get to the next page. But you'll see that there are 2 pages of properties. One's the balloon properties and the other is the envelope preferences. So I can either select envelope preferences from here, or I can click on next to go to the next page. And so let's say that shape was important and color pattern was important and the material was critical. And the capacity was slightly important. Vent configuration was slightly important. And height rating was moderately important. And this has been configured so that only the first 4 of these are required. So now, if I save this, because we said this was active, Checkers shows up here. And if we go to the members menu and I click on Collectibles and I search, let me reset the search from before. And now I search, Checkers should show up here. It shows that it's from Manny Diaz. If I click on it, we have the nylon, polyester, and Nomex. And you'll see that the things that we answered are here, including the things we checked, leisure and promotion and advertising, and the other choice, whatever we put into other. And of course, here we've got the album. And one thing I like to mention, because there have been massive changes recently to our help system, and that is that on all of these pages, you've got a help icon. So if you click on help, this will take us to the page about searching collectibles. And so you can go and look at the main collectibles page and look at all of this. So this is context sensitive to what you're looking at. And so let's go back over to collectibles. And so that's the way a member can manage their own items. And so that was all done from the member's profile page, going to collectibles, and they see what they've got here. If they decide that they don't want this to be shown anymore, they can go change it back into draft, or they can change it to archived, or they can delete it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to log in as a different user. I'm going to log in as Martin Smith, who is an administrator of this site. And when Martin looks at the collectibles, he sees the same thing as any of the members would see. So he's just treated as a regular member. But Martin, because he's an administrator, or if this would be the same for anybody who has been designated as a coordinator of the collectibles module, we can get to the collectibles manager screen because I'm logged in as an administrator by clicking on the edit icon here, or going to the control panel, going to the people tab, and clicking on collectibles or the edit icon here. Now, one thing I just mentioned was this is valid for anybody who is an administrator or a coordinator of the collectibles module. And the way you would add somebody as a coordinator, one of the ways of adding is to click on the coordinators icon here. You would add a coordinator. And so if we look for, say, Jenny Cho, we could select her and make her a coordinator. So if she logs in, she could also get to the same module. So let's just click on collectibles here. And so now we're getting the collectibles manager. And you'll see here, this is home control panel collectibles manager. So this is different than just managing the collectibles for one particular member. You have a search panel, which is similar to the user-facing search panel. And similarly, you can toggle additional questions. If I search, we get a little different information. We'll get the reference ID, which in this case is called the NAA registration number. We get the name of the item. We get the owner, and whether or not the owner is a member, what the member status is, and what the status of the item is. So this one here was rejected. You'll see we have one here that's been archived. We have one here that's in draft mode and such. And if we look at the members, we say, oh, okay, Lisa here, her membership has expired. And this one here, where it's blank, is because they're not a member. So there's no member status. So this one here is pulling from the non-member database. You got a member database and a non-member database. But there's a third possibility where if it was a registry, you might have someone that is simply an unknown member. So it's neither in your member database nor in your non-member database. So this way, this would say the owner is unknown. And we'll show you how to do that in a moment. In the maintain column, there are a couple of things that an administrator might want to do. So let's assume that this one here was rejected. The administrator can come in here, and if they had changed the registration ID, well, maybe the person called the administrator and said, oh, well, here's my registration ID, or maybe it was something else. It wasn't a registration ID, but whatever the issue was, now the status can be made active. The administrator can come in here and change it from rejected to active, or back to draft, but typically back to active. So that's a typical reason why an administrator might edit somebody else's item. Now, one of the things I didn't show before was a member can copy their own item. When we were looking at the member screen, if they click on copy, it will let you make a duplicate of that. Because maybe, as I mentioned, maybe it was that, okay, here was my original properties, and now I want to make a copy of it now that the item has been restored. We did body work, we changed we removed the top, we changed a sedan into a pickup truck, it could be anything. But administrators actually have a couple of options here. So if we click on this, it doesn't simply say copy, it says move or copy. So if I click on this here, if I move it, it can either go to an unknown person, or you select either a member or a non-member. If I copy it, it can go to unknown, it can go to a member or non-member, or you're copying it to the same person. So if we copy this collectible to the same person, it says the information was copied successfully, and we had Old Glory, now we have Old Glory copy. And so maybe I want to change this to New Glory. New Glory. And the thing is, what we changed was we changed the envelope color from blue to red. And we've renamed it, and we say save. And so now we have this new version of it called New Glory with the same reference ID. So if somebody searches for that reference ID, they'll see both New Glory and Old Glory. The same thing happens if it's a vehicle identification number, say for an automobile, or some other registry, some nautical registration for a boat or something like that. So this is the way of being able to track an item regardless of who owns it and what set of properties it has. And of course, we could, as an administrator, you can delete any item altogether. Let's take a look at some of the options available for the Collectibles Manager. If we click on options, you see that we have something that's a singular keyword for collectible item. So in our case, we're calling it a balloon. It could be automobile, could be yacht, could be pretty much anything. We have the reference ID keyword, which might be VIN for vehicle identification number, or in this case, the NAA registration number. And the question here is whether or not you want to show the collectibles module on the member profile. And that's where it shows up. If they click on their profile in that website section, if you do not put it on there, then it makes it really kind of difficult for them to go in and edit their own or manage their own collectibles. So you would typically put yes. Mailing list category just says, okay, when people add this in, what mailing list category do you want it to be? So you can mail to anybody who has collectibles. Then we have an option here, should only active members be surfaced in the search results? So if it's yes, you'll only see people that are not only members, but members whose memberships have not expired. You would choose no if you want to include everybody, particularly if you want to include non-members and unknowns. So this one is set up as known. You can decide not to show the reference ID, but we're going to show the reference ID. And then how do you want the collectible sorted by? So before they were sorted by reference ID, I probably select it by collectible name. And then what should the default be for the search page when you go to the collectibles page? Do you want the questions filter to not be shown, to start a collapse, or do you want it to be expanded, or always show the questions without letting the toggle show up? So let's just save that here. And I'm just going to touch on the properties. So properties are the additional questions. And this is treated much like the additional questions for a survey or I think ad hoc forms, not reports. Ad hoc forms are done this way, where questions, or in this case, properties, are set up into pages. There's a thing called the scratch pad page. In this case, we have a page called balloon properties and a page called envelope preferences. And you can add pages where it'll ask you for the name of the page, and that would just get added in here. Then within a page, you can add questions. So the scratch pad is just a place to keep questions that you don't want to surface on any particular page. Maybe you're still working on the question. So scratch pad is never shown. You can change the page sequence. So you could say, I want to show the preferences first, the balloon properties first. Each one of these have icons. So if you look at balloon properties, you can edit the page itself. You can get rid of the page, and any questions that were in here would get moved to the scratch pad. And you could reorder the questions on that page. So you can change your mind about some of this stuff later on. But if I just want to add a question, we click on Add Question. And first thing it says, well, what page do we want this to be on? So let's say we want this to be on the balloon properties. And we'll say, does this have a trailer? And we'll get back to the answer type in a moment. And normally you would have this as a question, like, how long have you owned this thing? Or when did you first buy something or whatever? In this case, we're using them as properties. So I'm not going to format this sort of as a question. So I'm just going to say has trailer. And you could put in a colon, but we didn't put that in for any of the others. In fact, I think I made this uppercase. And then under notes, does this balloon have a custom trailer? So this will appear underneath the value. Now, the answer type could be one of probably 20 different types if you look at the different variations. So in this case, I'm going to just say that this is a true or false. And because it's true or false, it surfaces two fields for true text and false text and a bunch of things here. If this was a select list, where I could have put in true, false, not sure, not yet, or something like that, then you would put in the choices here. And there's a lot of choices when it comes down to answer types. And there is a video here called ClubExpress Answer Types. And so it's a good idea to review this. It's about the 11 to 12-minute video that goes through all of the answer types with all of the choices for each of the answer types. So as we go down this list here, you'll see that it shows what gets surfaces for defaults, for time of days, and how they show up. So this is a very useful tutorial to show you what kinds of features are available for each of the answer types. So for now, we're just going to say that this is going to be a true or false. And it's true text could say true or yes, or positive, we can say yes. And its false text is going to be no. And is there a default answer? Do you want it to pre-select true or false, or just say there was no default? And whether or not it's required. So I'm going to say, no, it's not required. Do we allow comments? If we turn on yes, a field will show up underneath there where we can say, yes, it's rated for 5,000 pounds or whatever comments are available. We'll say no here. Can the member edit this? And this determines whether a member can edit this field or if only an admin can enter data. And whether or not this is a searchable question. If it's a searchable question, the answers will always be visible to everybody. If it is not a searchable question, then you get to decide whether everybody can view it, or only members can view it, or only admins can view it. So we're going to say that this is searchable for everybody. And if I save this, we now have this new item here. And here's where I would go in and change the order here and say, okay, I want it to be after this. And then it would show up here. So this is the way you can create a new question or a new property. If you have a question, say, has trailer, you can say, oh, I want to copy a question. And we look at the questions here and we say, let's look at has trailer. And if I save that, it goes into the scratch pad. And we could come over here and change it to say it has vehicle, because maybe it has a dedicated vehicle. So the point here is that if you've got something, particularly if it's something that's a lot of things that were configured, you just want another question the same. A custom tow vehicle. And so if I save that, then I would come in here and say, oh, okay, I really want that to go onto the balloon properties and save it. I could click over here and grab has vehicle and move it under has trailer. So this way, if I go back to the collectibles manager and we go to add for an unknown person, you'll see that has trailer and has vehicle show up in the list now in the place where we expected it to be. We'll get to add in a moment because we're coming short on time here. There are a couple of reports where you can look at a report by collectible name or by reference number. You can export, and if you export this, it exports to a comma delimited file, a CSV file, but it contains all of the items for all of your collectibles, including the scale stuff. If we go back to the properties, there is a thing here called add a scale question, which is what helps you set up the scale so that you'll have a bunch of things like those envelope preferences that we had. We have one line for each of the preferences, and then what are your column headings. This is also discussed in that answer type video, because this can save a tremendous amount of time because you don't have to set up a separate heading and try to work out the consistency between them. Going back to the collectibles manager, so if you add a balloon for a member, it's going to ask you to select the member. If you decide that you want to add a balloon for a non-member, it's going to ask you to select the non-member from the non-member database. See up here, it says select non-member. And if you say you're adding for an unknown person, it just brings you directly into the add screen where you fill in all the information. And as an administrator, you'll notice that these fields, latest Balloon Club inspection and the inspector comments, are live because you're an administrator. And we had specified that whether or not a member could edit the field. If the answer was no, that means only the administrators could edit the field. Is pretty much everything that I wanted to cover. So I think we've got pretty much everything. Samantha, are there any questions?
There are no questions.
Then we must have covered all of the items that were in the chat window. So if that is the case, Samantha, is there anything in particular that you wanted to mention that I haven't already covered?
I think that the collectibles module is really useful, if anything, just to be able to engage members even more and let everybody know, what great little items they have, sitting around in their backyard, particularly hot air balloons. I know I have a couple in my backyard that I would love to showcase, but I think it's a great little module, and I'm excited that so many people do use it.
Well, the collectibles module had a major update a couple of weeks back. So there are people who have been using it for years, and the additions to the module, additional functions, the way it looks now, is a result of a lot of really wonderful feedback from club administrators who say, well, we need this type of functionality for it to work for us. So we're very pleased to show off the new features and functionality. And so we thank everybody for coming to today's webinar and hope to see you at the next session.